Welcome to this explainer. We often think of plants as just static background scenery, right? Well, today, we're diving into chapter 13 of our biology text to completely flip that idea on its head. We are going to decode the hidden, highly structured biological mechanics that drive plant growth, because as you'll see, it is literally an exact, calculated science. So here is a fascinating mystery to start us off. How does an organism that cannot move, that is literally rooted in place, possess the biological software to relentlessly calculate and execute its own expansion? A tiny seed goes into the ground, and once conditions are right, it doesn't just passively swell up like a sponge. No, it kicks off a precise, highly ordered succession of events to build a complex body. But how fast is this actually happening down at the cellular level? Well, to really grasp the sheer scale of this machinery, get this. A single maize root tip can generate more than 17,500 new cells every single hour. I mean, that is absolute biological overdrive. It's expressing growth by just rapidly, relentlessly multiplying its cell count. Or consider a growing watermelon. A single cell inside that fruit can increase its size by an astonishing 350,000 times. That is just wild to think about. In this case, growth is expressed as an immense increase in the volume of the cell itself, mostly driven by water just flooding in and stretching those cell walls. Okay, so here is our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll look at the magic of meristems. Second, the math of growth. Third, cellular identity. And finally, plant growth regulators. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The magic of meristems, the fountains of youth.
Unlike animals, which generally hit maturity and just stop growing, plants possess these incredible things called meristems. They are essentially cellular fountains of youth. They allow the plant to keep adding new cells throughout its entire life. Biologists call this the open form of growth. These meristems are positioned right at the tips of roots and shoots, and they're just constantly churning out fresh plant material. If we look right behind the tip of a growing root, we see this growth happening in a super strict sequence. It's basically a three-step assembly line. First is the meristematic phase. Cells here are constantly dividing, packed with dense, living fluid called protoplasm, and they have these really large nuclei. Just behind that is the elongation phase. Here, cells stretch out by absorbing water into pockets called vacuoles, and they deposit new cell walls. And finally, furthest from the tip is the maturation phase. That's where cells reach their absolute maximum size and develop specialized structural thickenings. Moving right along to Section 2, the math of growth, arithmetic versus geometric. There are two primary ways these cells multiply mathematically. In arithmetic growth, after a cell divides, only one daughter cell keeps dividing while the other one matures. This creates a really steady, linear rate of growth, kind of like a root, just slowly, consistently elongating. But in geometric growth, all the progeny cells retain the ability to divide. So 1 becomes 2, 2 become 4, and so on, leading to this explosive, exponential growth. Now, when this geometric exponential multiplication happens in a natural environment where nutrients are limited, it graphs perfectly as a sigmoid or an S-curve. It always starts with a slow lag phase, then explodes exponentially, and finally it levels off into a stationary phase as the food runs out. Honestly, this S-curve is pretty much a universal hallmark of life growing in a natural environment. And this brilliantly illustrates the difference between absolute and relative growth rates. Imagine two leaves that both grew by the exact same absolute amount, say 5 square centimeters. But if one leaf was originally super tiny, that 5-centimeter addition is a massive percentage of its starting size, so it has a much higher relative growth rate. Biologists actually call this its efficiency index, which basically proves how incredibly efficient it is at generating new tissue. All right, let's hit Section 3, cellular identity and plasticity, biological decision-making. Plant cells go through a truly remarkable identity life cycle. They start by differentiating, which just means maturing to perform a specific job. For example, to become a water-carrying pipe, a cell will actually lose its living insides and build a strong elastic wall. But here is the crazy part. Living, differentiated cells can reverse the process. They de-differentiate, completely regaining their ability to divide. And then they can redifferentiate into entirely new, highly specialized tissues, like inner cells suddenly transforming into protective bark. It's literally like changing careers midway through life. This incredible flexibility gives plants a literal superpower called plasticity.
Plasticity is the ability to follow different structural pathways in response to the environment. Take a buttercup plant, for instance. It will actually change the shape of the leaves it produces depending on whether it's growing up in the open air or submerged underwater. Same plant, same genetics, just reading the environment to alter its own physical development.
And finally, Section 4, Plant Growth Regulators, the chemical directors. So, what's controlling all of this? Plant growth regulators, or PGRs. They're these small, simple molecules acting as chemical messengers, and they basically fall into two main camps. On one side, we have the accelerators that promote growth, directing cell division, flowering, and fruiting. These are your auxins, gibberellins, and cytokinins. On the flip side, we have the brakes. These trigger stress responses, dormancy, or leaf fall, like abscisic acid and, for the most part, ethylene. Together, they act like a perfectly balanced operating system for the plant.
But what's truly amazing, our modern knowledge of this entire chemical software began completely by accident. It actually started with Charles Darwin and his son Francis. They were just observing canary grass, and they noticed the protective sheath around the shoot was bending toward the light, a phenomenon called phototropism. That one accidental observation kicked off a chain of discoveries revealing the chemical influences we now call auxins, and it forever changed botanical science.
Uncovering these hidden mechanics entirely changes how we view the greenery around us, right? The life thriving just outside your window or that potted plant sitting on your desk, it isn't just passive scenery. It is constantly sensing, calculating, and adapting with absolute mathematical precision. So, next time you look at a simple houseplant, are you just seeing a nice decoration, or are you looking at a highly advanced biological machine?